off and folks will keep joining as they're able to. So first of all, hello everyone, and welcome to our first Lawyer Chapter Zoom meeting. I think that these calls have traditionally always been phone calls, and so it's nice to see some faces and to see everybody's names on the screen today. Today's call will be an open discussion, but we do ask that you stay on mute unless you're speaking. So just make sure that you remain on mute so we can hear our speakers today. Since the last time we checked in the spring, there's been a lot going on. The country has erupted into racial protests spurred by the continuous killing of Black people. Fires and hurricanes and national disasters have displaced people and destroyed communities. We've entered into election season full swing. With all of these constant attempts, with all of these new challenges, the constant attempt to undercut the faith in democracy and to threaten its integrity have been a backdrop the whole time. And especially in this current moment, I'm just all the more appreciative of the opportunity to spend my days connecting with all of you who are passionate and brilliant and progressive leaders. So really, thank you, as always, for all of the work that you already do as chapter leaders, and thank you for joining our call today. I hope you're all staying as healthy and grounded as possible, and that you're ready to take on the 2020 election. As a reminder, ACS is a 501c3 organization. We do not support political parties, positions, or candidates for public office. Today, we're going to talk about nonpartisan opportunities for ACS lawyer chapters to engage around the election. From poll working to voter protection work to training other members of your community to be voting rights advocates, attorneys can provide support and expertise in much needed ways. As lawyer chapter leaders, you are in an amazing position to organize your own ACS networks and your professional communities to ensure that votes get counted and elections are administered fairly. Today, we are joined by two incredible advocates and organizers who work hard to engage our members and the progressive community in election volunteering. First, we'll hear from my colleague, Ashley Erickson. As ACS's Director of Network Engagement or Advancement in charge of coordinating our pro bono and volunteer opportunities, Ashley works with partnering organizations to identify where our network will add the most value in the voting rights space. Then we will hear from Nevasha Noble, a regional field manager on the field and membership team at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. Nevasha has been building out trainings and a toolkit for And I Still Vote, All Voting is Local's new voter suppression and advocacy training. Ashley and Nevasha are going to talk about the many ways that you can lead your chapter in engaging around the upcoming election. And we will reserve some time at the end for questions, but folks should feel free to participate along the way as well. So feel free to raise your hand or just speak up if you do have questions as we go. Ashley and Nevasha, thank you so much for joining this conversation today. To get things started, can you each tell us a little bit about yourselves? How do you engage in election work in your current roles? And what do you see as the, the greatest need leading up to November? And Ashley, we'll kick things off with you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Molly. And thanks to all of you for joining this call. It's great to see everyone's faces. I know some of us have connected on email before, some of us haven't. It's really great to talk about, obviously, a very timely and important topic right now, getting involved in voting rights and work right now. I should say happy National Poll Worker Recruitment Day, September 1st. Today is National Poll Worker Recruitment Day. We will talk a little bit about that as this conversation goes on. But just a quick intro about me. I've been at ACS 3.5 years. I came in and sort of started this new formal role of engaging both our students and lawyers in pro bono work. And it's been a really great opportunity. And there's been so much enthusiasm from our members to get involved with on the ground and virtual efforts. And I've been a part of ACS for a long time. I originally got my start as a student chapter president at Brigham Young University Law School, small but mighty ACS chapter there. So I work with both ACS-led projects and then also, as Molly mentioned, plugging our members into efforts led by coalition partners. where they're really enthusiastic to get our members involved in their work. A large portion of my portfolio is voting related. We have some long-standing projects that fall within that category, obviously things that come up with emerging needs depending on the timing. One of our long-standing projects is All Voting is Local. Some of you here I know are in All Voting is Local states and have connected with your state directors there and are familiar with that program. We'll be hearing some more about that and the leadership conference's work on this and Still a Vote training. And another thing that we always plug our members into every election season is the nonpartisan National Election Protection Coalition. Sorry, are we having some audio issues? Can you hear me?
I can hear you sometimes really well, and then sometimes it's a little faint. So that's why I put that in the chat. Sorry.
No worries. I want to make sure that everyone can hear me.
Yeah, now you're really good.
Perfect. Then
Thanks.
I will keep this here. I should mention, if you're in an All Voting is Local state, I've probably recently reached out to you, or will be reaching out to you about upcoming opportunities. But then there are nationwide opportunities, election protection, things that are coming up with cybersecurity, working on remote election protection opportunities, since not everyone feels comfortable being on the ground right now. And then, talking about poll workers, the needs, there's a critical shortage right now for poll workers in all localities across the country right now as well. Those are really my quick highlights and a long introduction, and I can turn my time over to Nevasha.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nevasha Noble, and as mentioned, I'm a regional field manager at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And so I've been with the Leadership Conference for about 10 months now, so still kind of fairly new, just about to reach my year. And originally I was hired to work on the education equity campaign, focusing on making sure that all students had access to a quality education, especially marginalized groups. But again, during this important time, we needed all hands on deck for voter rights and things like that. And so I kind of jumped in to help with facilitating and creating a training that really gets at the crux of voter suppression. So like, we already understand the importance of voting, but we really wanted to get at what those discriminatory pieces were and like how people are actually being turned away from the ballot because of a lot of different things that are being put in place. And so we really wanted to have a training that kind of spoke to something new. And so we created the voter suppression and advocacy tool. But not only did we want to just be able to educate people about what was taking place now, but we really wanted to give them tools to be able to take steps to advocate in their own way. And people can do that in very different ways. And so I've been working very closely with our voting rights team to create this training. So there's like, and we'll get into what the different pieces of this training is. But what we're doing as a leadership conference right now is really thinking about like poll workers. As mentioned, today is the poll worker day, so that's exciting. But we not only want to push people to be poll workers, but it's also important to make sure that poll workers are staying safe, especially during this time, because again, like a lot of the older people who usually are poll workers are unable to do that because they are at higher risk. And so we want to be able to, even though we want to recruit more people to be poll workers, we want to make sure that they're still able, they're safe, and they're healthy and in the right space to be able to do so. We don't want to try to push people to do things that will put them at risk. So we also want to make sure that we're cognizant to that. And so that's what a lot of our like messaging is around, to like making sure that people are able, healthy, and staying safe to be poll workers. So that's one thing that we've been doing big time right now. But then also just about like kind of like pressuring, especially the importance of just the safety of poll workers, not just poll workers themselves, but also the people who are going to go to the polls, right? So we want to make sure that they have like the safety measures. But then in addition to the poll working piece, we also want to make sure that the technology that's being used, whether you're going to be able to mail in your ballot, whether you're doing it online, but making sure those things are safe and making sure that each state actually has the resources that they need to be able to properly execute those technologies and the mail-in ballots and making sure they have the staff to be able to do those things, just making sure that they're properly resourced to do those things. And as we can see, we've been also like asking and pushing for like emergency funds to make sure that all states are able to have what they need to be able to make sure that everybody has the right to vote. So those are just a little bit of the things that we've been doing, and most importantly, just educating people about voting rights and getting them out there to vote and making sure people do that, and being a place where people can kind of ask, like, where do I go for resources? So if I'm in Missouri or if I'm in any other state, where can I go to get the resources that I need to vote in my state? Because as we all know, that all states have different laws and policies and things like that. So we want to make sure that we're being responsive to those states.
Thanks, Nevasha. I think that that's a lot of exactly what folks are looking for. So we'll hear more from Nevasha about what some of those resources are. But first, we're going to turn it back to Ashley. And Ashley, can you tell folks a little bit more about ways that ACS has traditionally engaged in elections in the past, and what are some of the opportunities that they can plug into through ACS right now?
Yeah, so I should re-up what Molly mentioned. You know, the ACS is a nonpartisan organization. All the things we're going to talk about are not political. There will probably be plenty of ways to get involved now and even after the election in more politically aligned opportunities. But there are so many things on the ground to get involved with on a nonpartisan level. So I mentioned before our partnership that we have with All Voting is Local, which is housed the leadership conference and these trainings that Nevasha is going to be telling us more about. For those of you who are in an All Voting is Local state, those are Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Just a heads up that we are organizing state-specific voter suppression advocacy trainings for you with those state directors. I've reached out to some of you already. Others I will be looping in soon to coordinate on that programming. But we've been a part of the All Voting is Local coalition since its inception at the beginning of 2018. Through that, many of our members in those states and also members outside of those states have been able to get involved in efforts, whether it was, programming on, educating communities about various historical voting issues, research projects. There are oftentimes things that come up that we need help from members with on their on-the-ground efforts. For example, some of our lawyers in Philadelphia for the primary just a month or two ago got involved with rapid response efforts. Those opportunities are available nationwide as well through the National Nonpartisan Election Protection Coalition. Things like poll monitoring, that traditionally has been on the ground. There are some opportunities now to do that virtually. And we're actually working with Common Cause right now on some ways to work on cyber suppression. So if anyone is interested in getting involved virtually with combating that, if you don't feel comfortable on the ground, we have opportunities there that you can share with your members. And if you personally are interested in getting involved, there are always opportunities to help with voter hotlines through the Election Protection Coalition partnership as well. And even some of our chapter leaders have started or revitalized election protection efforts in their own state and have really decided to take this on themselves and organize where there may not have been like a specific presence previously. If that's something that you're interested in, if you're in a state where there isn't a strong election protection coalition already on the ground, I'm happy to connect you with leaders at various national organizations to help you in that process to get involved there. Another thing that our members have gotten involved with in the past has been rights restoration work. So a number of states, there are opportunities we've seen recently in Florida and Tennessee. I know Nevada has a lot of opportunities right now where chapters have hosted clinics and trainings to help with those through, oftentimes there's a long process to actually get rights restored. And so chapters have helped out with that as well. Another thing in the past, in 2018 with All Voting is Local, we did a big plug on becoming a poll worker. We're still doing that this year. This year we're partnering with Power the Polls. They're sort of the big national organization on the scene right now, where they are really emphasizing, both signing up to become a poll worker, but healthy elections as well, both for poll workers and the safety of those who are voting. That's obviously if you feel comfortable doing so. We are in a pandemic. I know that there are concerns there. We have been doing quite a bit of an effort in this regard with our law student chapters, but there's definitely an opportunity for lawyer chapters to organize around this as well. Whether you encourage your members to get involved individually, or if you're interested in doing some sort of larger effort, actually reaching out to your election officials, figuring out what their needs are. If there is a large enough interest in chapter members, sometimes localities will also be willing to organize training specific for chapters. Obviously, that can be a little different this year with COVID and everything that's going on there, but something to consider, and I can share more information about that. We also have an ACS specific landing page for Power the Polls that you can sign up at, share with your members, where they can directly get involved. Another thing that Power the Polls is encouraging as well is very similar to our student-led election day class cancellation, which is having individuals reach out directly to their workplaces to suggest that they can take the day off to volunteer on election day, not just to vote, but to take the entire day to get involved in on-the-ground efforts. So that's something to consider as well. Another thing that's a long-standing ACS program is Constitution in the Classroom, and very aptly this year our focus is on voting rights. Now that also looks a little differently. During the pandemic, we are encouraging chapters to get involved virtually, to contact schools to see how they can loop in there as well. Also, if you're interested in that, you can reach out to me more about that. And so there are plenty of ways to get involved, both on the ground and virtually. I'm more than happy to talk about what works best for your chapter, to talk about what leaders have done in the past. So definitely keep that in mind. Let me know.
Thanks, Ashley. And so one of the opportunities that Ashley mentioned and that we've been working with All Voting is Local on is their new voter suppression and advocacy training. And I think this training is really awesome. Nevasha will tell you more about it, but one of the reasons that I think it's great, especially for chapter leaders, is that you will have the option to not only get trained as a voting rights advocate, but you can also get trained as train the trainers session where you'll get trained to go out and train other people to be voting advocates. And similar to Constitution in the Classroom, this is a great way for your ACS chapter to engage with your community at large and share a lot of the information that we talk about frequently at ACS events with folks that might not be as aware of the history of voting rights and the history of voter suppression in this country. So I'm going to turn it over to Nevasha to tell you more about that training and the toolkit that she's built out around it.
Thank you. So yes, as mentioned, we do have a voter suppression advocacy training that we're extremely excited about and that we've been kind of going full force ahead and training people, and it's been quite exciting thus far. And so essentially there is an actual training. So there's a PowerPoint presentation that we put together and that we tailor to the audience that we are presenting to. Because again, as I was saying earlier, that all states are a little bit different. And so we want to make sure that we're catering to those needs of our audience. And then we also have a toolkit, which is a supplemental document to the presentation that gives you kind of like takeaway information that you can kind of like use to be able to be an advocate once the training is over. And so then there's also a script that we came up with. So if you were to go out and train other people on this voter suppression advocacy training, you can kind of just go through it. And like, of course, you would add like different things. So there's like stories of self, like why you got into this work and why it's really important to you to make it a little bit more personable. And so we kind of like go through that and explain why those story of selves are so important. And then we try to be as engaging as possible to make sure that like people are understanding all the information that's being thrown their way, because it is a lot of information. So those are like the three different parts of this training. And so first, to just talk about the actual training itself. So what we first start with is the history of voter suppression, which is extremely important because it is because the history of voter suppression is not something that's new. It's not something that just came about. It's something that has been kind of like deeply rooted in our American democracy for some time now. And especially given these times, we want to make sure that these like the suppression of voters is addressed so that all people can have access to vote, because we all know that voting is the language of American democracy, and we want everybody to be able to have a part in that. And so we kind of go through that history, explaining like the different groups and when they were able to actually have the opportunity to vote. And so we want to be able to explain that. But once we explain the different things that happen so that Black people can have the right to vote, women can have the right to vote, and so forth, we also talk about the importance that although we made those steps and that those strides that are really good, we also still have some work to do. And that's where we kind of like want to create that foundation for the training. So it's like, although we did make a lot of progress thus far, there's still some things that still need to be done because there are still people being turned away from being able to vote. And so that's kind of like what we are grounded in at the beginning. And as mentioned before, this is a C3 training, so we don't necessarily push for very specific bills that we're trying to push, but really just the overall issue area that we just really want to make sure that people can get out and vote no matter what their background or their circumstances are. And so that's like the really big piece of this training. So once we go through the history, we take a deeper dive into like state pieces. And so given the different audiences that we are catering to, some people it's just like a general overview of state work, but if we're doing it based on like just for a specific state, then we start really digging into the different things that are taking place at this moment in time and the things that we should be addressing in those specific states. And as mentioned, there are these key priority states that we are focusing on. And I know that there's going to be trainings with those states. And so there will be a more focus on that, but we do kind of talk about that in a general sense of the different types of things going on in the different states. So that's the next part. And so then after we go through the history and then we go through the state information, we then get into the advocacy piece of things. And so it's just like, now that we have all this information about the history and the different things that are going on, what can we do as advocates to be able to make sure that everybody has that ability to have the right to vote when November comes? And so there's a lot of different ways that people can kind of be engaged. And that's what we also wanted to highlight. So it's not just one set way to be an advocate. There are multiple ways to be advocates. And so we kind of talk about being able to just bring people on board and just explain the importance of voting if they don't like necessarily want to vote. We want to make sure that they know that they can vote and how to do it. And sometimes people just don't know how. So we kind of provide that information to be able to share with other people who are maybe like, who may not know. That type of information. So this is really a piece of like education. And then the next thing is just like the importance of just having safe polls. And so again, we're not asking for a specific legislation or anything like that, but as we all know, as a collective, we want everybody to be healthy and safe as they go out and get people to sign up to vote, or if they're just being able to educate people. So we kind of talk about that. And then we also have a piece about social media for people who may not want to go out into the streets and be able to sign people up or help people mail off their ballots and things like that. We still want people to know that even if you don't leave your home, you can still be an advocate, right? So we have a messaging guide that kind of that gives you some key points on how to talk about voter suppression and what words to use and what words not to use. And this is important because our communications team has taken a lot of time to do a lot of the research. So they've done like focus groups, they've talked to people on the ground to really understand what messaging resonates the most with people that are in this, that's essentially in America, right? And we want to make sure that the language that we're using is representative of all people. And so they've been doing this research for some time. So we have that messaging guidance to kind of help you think about how you're going to talk about this with other people. And so that's another piece of our training that we kind of go through. And then we also just go through different advocacy tactics that can be utilized to get more people on board. So whether it's like patch through calls, whether it's textathons, whether they're create-a-thons, there's just so many different ways for people to like get people on board and to engage other people around voting. So we kind of talk about that. So we give detailed information on how you can even do that, some of the platforms that you can use to do that. And how you can like work with other organizations to do that as well. And so then once we do that, we kind of just wrap all that stuff up, and then we provide you with some resources that you can kind of use to later be an advocate. And so that's where the toolkit comes in. So as I was saying, it's a supplemental document. And so this document, again, gives the overview, like a timeline of the history, just so that you can be able to access that quickly. And then it also gives some op-ed examples, because we all know that that's another advocacy tactic that can be used if you may not want to go out into the streets and do things. You can still do, again, things from your home. So you can do op-eds, you can write letters to the editor. And so we give you some tips and tricks on how to do that based on our experience. And we also give some examples of that. Then we also have kind of like a social media toolkit that's within the toolkit, so that you can be able to engage on social media. So we have like really nice graphics that we include on there. So if you click them, you can upload them to Twitter, Facebook, and then there's some sample tweets that you can also use so that you can talk about the issue at hand. And so those are the things that are really in there. And we really just hope that it's useful to everyone. And again, it's C3, so we're not asking for anyone to take a specific legal, political stance or anything like that, but it's just that we all are in understanding that everyone should have the right to vote, and we want to make sure that everybody is safe, especially during this pandemic, and they can vote. So essentially, this training gives you all the materials that you need to be able to do that. And also in the toolkit at the end, there is like additional resources. So there are like hotline numbers that you can call if you have any questions. There's certain websites that you can go to. So if you have a specific question about a specific state, you can go to those websites and they'll give you a little bit more information. And so then there's just a bunch of other additional resources. And of course, we can be a resource to you as well. So reaching out to us if there's something that's not in there, we can definitely be of use to you all. And so again, then the script essentially just lays all this out. So if you were to go out and do the training, you have a script that you can kind of like, not necessarily read off, but you can kind of make it your own, and you can kind of take points away from that. So that's what the training is. And thus far, we've done a good amount of training. We've been able to train about 1,000 people, and people have given us really good feedback on the information and the training that's in there. So that's a little bit about the training. I know that was a lot of information, so I hope I covered everything and everyone followed.
Thanks, Nevasha. And yeah, just to let everybody know, we'll follow up with some materials, both about how you can sign up for the trainings, as well as other ways that you can engage that Ashley mentioned. And feel free to chime in with questions if you have any questions so far on anything Ashley or Nevasha have talked about. And while you're all pondering what excellent questions you're going to ask, I'm going to turn it back over to our speakers. And Ashley and Nevasha, you both have shared some really awesome resources and ways to engage and ways to tap into the election. Do you have any thoughts for all of our leaders, since this is a group of people who go back and lead their own chapters and lead progressive work in their communities? Do you have thoughts and ideas to share with them about ways that they can mobilize their own chapters and mobilize folks on the ground beyond just individual engagement?
Yeah, so first of all, I'll plug, join the trainings, especially the second training we're going to do. The trainings are going to be on September 14th and the 16th. The first training on the 14th is going to be for individuals who just want to do this work themselves. The training on the 16th is going to be the Train the Trainers program. So definitely get involved with that, because I know like not only you, but other members of your board and other chapter members can participate in that, and then take this further out into your community, which is really important, because we're really trying to spread the word here. So definitely do that first item of business. Join those trainings. Second, volunteer to be a poll worker with election protection, but even more importantly, think about organizing your members around this as well. Think about doing an organized poll worker recruitment effort, looping people into election protection efforts, and there are a lot of ways that we can help you throughout that. And just think about general community education, whether that's, your actual locality or even social media. I think there are a lot of tools that we'll be able to share with you on just helping to combat disinformation and suppression that's going on online. Like I mentioned, there's a project that we're working on with Common Cause right now on that as well, that I'd love to plug people into to help out with that. Another thing I should plug is we are putting together a really great checklist for our ACS members on things that you can do to get yourself ready for election 2020, both for individuals and for chapters. Shout out to my colleague Lindsay, who's on this call, who's doing a lot of the work on this. And it's things that you can share, like the individual checklist that you can share with members of your community. It goes all the way from simple things like check your voting registration, make a voting plan, to attend one of these trainings, to sign up to be a poll worker and do election protection, writing an op-ed. If you're in all voting is local state, be sure to connect with your state director there for opportunities. And think especially about doing programming with your chapters on these issues. And the great thing is, in this virtual environment, there's also great opportunities to partner as chapter leaders on programs like this as well. And there are obviously a lot of important issues that are going on here. And we at National ACS are more than happy to help find speakers and help in that planning process. So please keep all of that in mind.
So I would definitely just echo what Ashley had mentioned. So yes, join the trainings because they're going to be super helpful, and they're also just super fun, I think. And I'm not just saying this because I'm also one of the trainers, but it's like really fun to be able to engage and have these conversations about such an important issue. So that's one thing. And then I really think that really engaging in these advocacy tactics, whether it's like a textathon, so you all are kind of getting together and just sending out information about the importance of voting and how you can make sure that you're registered to vote and making sure that everything is up to date. And then I know I've heard some organizations doing rallies, virtual rallies, of course, because we are in the pandemic, which I think is extremely creative. And so it's a fun way to get people involved, but then you're also still bringing attention to important issues as well. And so they've had music, and they've had guest speakers to talk about what voting is, and talked about voter suppression and things that we should be trying to address. And if you're trying to get people to be poll workers, it's a great way to do the whole rallying as well, because then you have guest speakers, you have music, and it's just oh, by the way, you should sign up to be a poll worker. And so it kind of gets people going and really gets people amped up. So we've seen great we've seen great turnout with the rallies, and then different things such as even engaging on social media, because everybody's on social media nowadays. And so really being able to kind of just push the messaging out there and really explain, like Ashley's mentioning, the checklist. Those are good things to also put on Facebook or Twitter, so that people can also think oh, did I actually do these things? Oh, I don't have this, or I don't have that. Or if it's just oh, well, if you don't have some of those things checked off on your checklist, you should go here, you should go here. So it's a great way to engage people. And so within your member organizations and things like that, once you equip them with all this knowledge and all these tools, they can also go out and kind of engage and create knowledge, be a wealth of knowledge for other people on social media as well. And then just working with other organizations, of course, is just important, because as coalitions, you're just stronger and you're able to have a further reach. So
thank you. We have a great question from somebody who had to hop off that I want to get to in just a second, but just to touch on a couple of things that were mentioned, and especially because I know my California folks showed up strong for this call today. If you are in a state where, first of all, make sure that your state is handling elections well. All states are struggling with proper election administration. So tune into opportunities to engage in your own state. But also, if you're in a state where you're not as concerned about proper election administration, or you feel like your state has more of the support that it needs, ACS is a great platform to connect with leaders in other states that you think might need that support. And so, programs like Vote Save America have opportunities to sponsor different states, and you can similarly use ACS's platform to make sure that all of the nonpartisan engagement that we're tuning people into has the support it needs in every state. So feel free to reach out to us to connect you to each other, or use the Lawyer Chapter Leader listserv to connect with other states. But this is a great opportunity to kind of take the work on a national scale in the way that we aren't always able to with folks on the ground. So definitely connect with each other on that front, and we can maximize the efficiency of our whole network beyond just your communities on the ground, which you all do such a great job of doing individually. So Quinn asked a great question, highlighting the fact that there are additional challenges to being a poll worker this year, which I think you both talked about in terms of maintaining safety, both for poll workers and for the folks who are voting. Do either of you know about any support for people who want to be poll workers but don't have the financial means to do so, in terms of the cost of quarantine or getting extra PPEs or anything like that?
So I can say, at least on the terms of the personal protective equipment, every locality should be providing it for poll workers. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's happening. One of the great things is if you sign up to be a poll worker for Power the Polls, this is one of the big things that they're pushing, and they've gotten a lot of corporate sponsors to help with this as well. And so if you sign up to be a poll worker and you find out that your locality, for whatever reason, isn't providing enough or doesn't have the resources, like that's something that you can then connect to Power the Polls about to see if there's a way to fill the gap there. Just to give you a heads up that I think every state pays poll workers for their service. It varies based upon state. Now, when you break it down, like the hourly pay over the cost of a 12 or 14-hour day, it's not a lot, but it is there to sort of help ease the burden of taking the day off of work. So in something.
The same thing about like they do compensate you for the time, and it might not be a lot, but they do compensate. As far as other supports, I'm not sure of that right now, but I can definitely look into that. So when we do have the training in the near future, I'll make sure that include that in the training too.
All right, and I would add also that that this is not necessarily to answer the question directly, but things like quarantine periods and really needing to take extra precautions, they are just a reality of this election cycle. And so, like both Ashley and Nevasha have underscored, we do want to make sure that we're recruiting and encouraging folks who are healthy and safe to volunteer to do so. And where that might be an issue for folks, that's where we're hoping that a lot of the other opportunities that we've talked about today, both in terms of taking the trainings and taking on the role of training other folks to be voting rights advocates, or plugging into other virtual opportunities to poll monitor or do voter protection work, there is absolutely a need for poll workers. There is always a need for poll workers, and this year it's more extreme than ever. And there's also plenty of other ways to engage that are super important to making sure that everybody can vote, that those votes get counted, and that elections are administered fairly. So don't let that hold you back if you or folks you know are in a position where poll working doesn't seem like the right call. That's where you can take your training and take all of the resources that you get through ACS to redirect those folks to opportunities that might make more sense for them. Yes, Marissa, we will send lots of links and contact information and places to register for trainings. Like Ashley said, our colleague Lindsay has been working on putting together a checklist for folks. What Nevasha mentioned is a really great idea also for chapters to do sort of on any level that makes sense, either amongst your board or within your greater membership base or within your greater community, is to create voting plans. And so that will be mentioned on our checklist. There's lots of resources both in this organization and on the internet for how to come up with voting plans. So there we will absolutely send lots of information with registration and resources and contact information after this. Do folks have other questions for Ashley and Nevasha? Any other questions or concerns or things you've been thinking about that you want to chat with other lawyer chapter leaders? We'll just kind of open up the floor to see if anybody has things that they want to chime in with.
So Molly, I saw in the text box a question from Austin, and you might have an answer to this too. Oftentimes that ends up being a political process. So there are some opportunities that will come through election protection, but that is something that quite often ends up being led by one like candidate or political party over another. So we won't probably have as many opportunities to monitor the counting or validation of votes.
Yes, that is correct in terms of monitoring after the fact. And like Ashley said at the beginning, there are both political parties are ramping up to engage in elections, and all of that information is out there for you to find in your individual capacities if that's the direction that you want to go. But I also will point out that there's a lot of monitoring and tracking going on right now that's really important. Here in California, we are connecting folks to the ACLU in Northern California, who is trying to monitor all 58 counties in the state and look at what their plan for their election administration is. Notice if there's any opportunities for notice and comment within that period to be able to comment and provide feedback on what their plans are. And so a lot of entities are doing a lot of monitoring and tracking right now to gear up for the election before we even get to the points of counting or recounting votes. And so that's always something that is great to reach out to other organizations in your community that are doing this work. And if you need help identifying who those are, you can absolutely reach out to Ashley or myself. I think some of kind of who the big time players are also listed in the toolkit that Nevasha has been working on. So hopefully you'll have multiple resources for identifying who some of the people are in your state doing this work. But that's a place where I think attorneys can add a lot of value right now, and is done in a nonpartisan way before we get to the point where parties sort of take over the counting and recounting that happens. Any other questions? Let's see. Great question. So Mark asks offering that it very well might be state by state, which I think it does. Are there any laws mandating any time off work to allow for voting that you're aware of? I know that New York State, or at least New York City, makes Election Day a holiday and gives folks time off to vote. Ashley or Nevasha, do you know of other municipalities or localities that give time off for voting?
I can't speak to that. I'm not sure of any of the laws that mandate any time off work.
And off the top of my head, I don't either.
It's a great thing to look into, and as I've said, if there's ways that we can connect you either directly to information or to folks who are on the ground collecting that information in your various states, we're happy to point you in that direction as well. I know that Election Protection has state-by-state guides on their website for what some of the voting guidelines and election laws are in those states. I don't off the top of my head know if time off work is included in their breakdowns, but that's always a good place to start if you're looking for more state-specific information. Any other questions, thoughts, ideas, comments? Great. Well, if you do have questions or comments as you think about things afterward, don't hesitate to reach out. Like I said, we'll send follow-up notes with guidelines and information about how to register for the trainings. I really do recommend checking them out. I think it's a great way to dive deeper into the work and to feel more confident in having these conversations with other people, like I said, in your ACS networks or in your professional communities or in your personal communities. I know I have a lot of friends right now reaching out and thinking about how they can dive into some voter protection work and supporting states that need the support. So hopefully some combination of all of the resources that we share afterward will be helpful to guide you as you kind of individually take on election engagement, but then also bring it back to your chapters as your chapter leaders and organize folks on the ground to make sure that as many votes get cast, get counted, and that elections are as fairly administered and safe and hassle-free as possible, which certainly feels like a much more insurmountable goal this year than it has even in the past. But thankfully for folks like you, I think that we can put our best efforts into making that happen. So thank you all for joining us today. Ashley, Nevasha, thank you for sharing with everyone. You both have incredible resources that I'm very excited to plug all of our folks into. So I hope everybody enjoys your 13 minutes extra of this time today. Stay safe, stay grounded out there. Thank you all, and we will talk to you soon.